Coming up on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon, Seoul seeks Beijing's cooperation in its probe into the recent hacking of South Korean nuclear power plants after confirming that hackers used China-based IP addresses. North Korea figures high again on Washington's foreign policy agenda following the recent cyber attack on Sony Pictures, which the US blames on the North. Plus, the government confirms large companies will face an additional tax next year unless they spend 80% of their profits on investment, wage hikes or dividend payments. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Friday, December 26th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon, Korea's state-run nuclear agency remains on high alert amid lingering concerns of a cyber attack after threats were made against reactors.
A hacker has been demanding the reactors be shut down, but the government has confirmed that a Christmas Day cyber attack, which the hacker had threatened, never occurred. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The government and nuclear plant operators remain on high alert, with a hacker possibly linked to North Korea threatening to disrupt operations at nuclear facilities in the nation. The suspicion arose as prosecutors confirmed that the hacker had been using IP addresses in Shenyang, China, which is used as a base by an unknown number of North Korean hackers. But when asked about Pyongyang's possible involvement, the investigation team declined to confirm nor deny. Korea has requested judicial assistance from the Chinese government to help conduct an investigation into the IP addresses. China has not yet responded to the request. Meanwhile, officials at the state-run Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Corporation began conducting inspections on Christmas Day and continue to do so. They have so far found no signs that any system has been compromised, but say they will remain in state of emergency until 8 a.m. local time on Saturday. The suspected hacker threatened to release over 100,000 pages of data on the nation's nuclear power plants and conduct a second wave of cyber attacks unless the Kwori 1, Kwori 3, and Worsung 3 nuclear reactors were shut down for 3 months, starting on Christmas Day. Scores of documents, including blueprints and internal information on some facilities, have already been leaked on 5 different occasions since last Monday. The Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Corporation manages a total of 23 local nuclear reactors, which supply around 30% of the country's electricity needs. Security Chief Kim Kwon-jin emphasized on Thursday that the suspected attacker or group does not have access to control systems for the nuclear facilities, which are separate from the external system that was hacked last week. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The release of the controversial comedy film on North Korea triggered another cyber attack on Sony on Christmas Day, this time on its PlayStation Network. And as the interview was shown in select U.S. theaters, hackers also took down Microsoft's Xbox Live site, which has the film available on demand. Connie Lee has more on the story.
Sony has received an unwanted Christmas present from hackers. The company's PlayStation Network is down again, with visitors to the site saying that the page is under scheduled maintenance. This follows a 6-hour outage the day before on Christmas Eve and an outage back in November. The latest hacking was done by the same anonymous hacker group Lizard Squad, who claimed responsibility for the other hacks. These hackers had previously threatened a cyber attack on Christmas Day for Sony's release of the film The Interview. Microsoft's Xbox Live site, which has the film for sale and rent on demand, is also down after an attack by the same hacker group. Microsoft and Sony have yet to comment on the hack, but they say they are working to fix the issues. Nevertheless, it was on with the show with the North Korea-based comedy film that sparked all the cyber attacks. The Interview was released in 320 U.S. theaters on midnight Christmas Day, with fans generally enjoying the film, maybe more so because of the controversy surrounding it.
This is a film I probably would not have come to see, but because of the controversy, I thought I would come out tonight to stand up for freedom of speech.
I mean, it's funny, but it's definitely nothing that could topple a monarchy.
The interview was originally pulled from all theaters by Sony because of threats of violence against cinemas and moviegoers. And the film is now available online through video platforms like Google Play and YouTube Movies and on its dedicated website, seetheinterview.com. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
North Korea, meanwhile, is experiencing some internet disruptions for the fourth consecutive day today. The communist nation's official news agency website went down from 1 a.m. Friday for about the next 7 hours. The site is back up at this hour, but the contents are loading slowly. North Korea's propaganda site also experienced disruptions over the past few days and is currently completely down. Internet services in that country went completely down on Tuesday, and although it could be due to a cyber attack, the exact reason remains unclear. Now, following the recent hack attack on Sony Pictures, North Korea is back on top of Washington's diplomatic policy agenda. According to sources in the U.S., Pyongyang's latest moves have strengthened the resolve of the U.S. to punish North Korea, and countermeasures are being thoroughly discussed. Kim Kani has the details.
The U.S. is expected to clamp down on North Korea in light of the recent cyber attack against Sony. Diplomatic sources in Washington say the Senate and the House of Representatives are seeking to pass a bill that will strengthen sanctions against the regime. Two separate bills that would have done that were recently scrapped as the current session of Congress expires next week. But lawmakers Ed Royce and Robert Menendez, who are behind these legislation, are expected to make a new push next year. The legislation is expected to include elements from previous set of U.S. sanctions imposed on North Korea in 2005 that limit North Korea's access to international financial institutions. The incoming chairman of U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations is reportedly on board with the move. Pyongyang has emerged as a hot topic in Washington due to the international spotlight on the North's abysmal human rights record. The UN Security Council added the North Korean human rights issue to its agenda earlier this month. The U.S. Congress for the first time passed a bill calling for probe into North Korea's political prison camps in December. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
There are signs that North Korea might be seeking to improve inter-Korean ties in the new year. A former South Korean official who met with North Korea's top policymaker for South Korean affairs this week said the regime appears ready for fresh dialogue. Hwang Seung-yi reports.
North Korea's official in charge of South Korean affairs says he understands President Park Geun-hye's sincerity about improving inter-Korean ties. Former Culture Minister Kim Sang-jae told the Yonhap news agency that he passed on the South Korean leader's thoughts to Kim Yang-gun when they met at the Kaesong Industrial Complex on Wednesday. In response, the North Korean official said he understands. He also showed a willingness to return to the negotiating table.
He said issues like the Mount Kumgang tours, the May 24 sanctions, and reunions for war-separated families can open up small roads that lead to bigger ones, eventually leading to peaceful improvements in South-North relations.
If true, it would mark a dramatic shift in Pyongyang's attitude. The regime had dismissed any improvement in relations under Seoul's current policies, which North Korea deems hostile. Some caution about the comments being blown out of proportion since they were not made in a high-level meeting. But others are paying close attention to the timing. They say it could signal Pyongyang's willingness to re-engage depending on Seoul's next moves, and add that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un could extend an olive branch to the south in his New Year's speech. Hwang Sang-yi, Arirang News.
A new survey from Japan shows most Japanese wrongly believe Korea's Dokdo Island belongs to Japan. The survey conducted by the Japanese Cabinet Office on Thursday found that a staggering 73% of respondents think Dokdo is Japanese territory. And out of the nearly 2,000 people who answered the survey, around two-thirds, 64%, believe that Korea is illegally holding the islets. Now, despite continual false territorial claims by Japan, the Korean government states quite clearly that from the perspective of history, geography and international law, Dokdo is clearly Korean territory. Starting next year, large companies here in Korea will have to spend 80% of their after-tax income on either investments, wage increases or dividend payments. If not, they will fall foul of the government's new tax scheme. This is aimed at forcing companies to spend more of their large cash reserves. Hwang Jie has the details.
The Korean government has finalized its measures to tax corporate cash reserves. The finance ministry says that from next year, local manufacturers with equity capital of more than 50 billion won, or roughly $45 million, will have to spend 80% of their earnings after taxes on investments, raising wages or paying out dividends. If the companies fail to meet the 80% mark, the government will collect 10% of their remaining cash reserves and taxes. But companies in the service sector that spend less on facilities investments will only have to spend 30% of their after-tax income on wage and dividend payments. The new tax scheme is a temporary plan that will apply to business results for 2015 through 2017. It's aimed at boosting investment and revitalizing sluggish domestic demand during the current Park Geun-hye administration. The government expects more than 3,000 large companies and their sister companies to be affected by the plan. The plan comes as criticism mounts over large companies sitting on excessive cash reserves. Korean companies are notorious for paying out some of the lowest dividends in the world. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
The Korean government has postponed by 1 year its plans to tax religious leaders and churches. These people and houses of worship have been exempt from taxation on their earnings for decades now, but some worry the delay raises the chance that this tax reform will be pushed back even further. Our Park Ji-won reports.
The Korean government's attempt to impose tax on the earnings of clergy members will be delayed for 1 more year. The government was originally scheduled to start levying taxes on the nation's clergy members, like priests and monks, from the start of next year, which is less than a week away. But the finance ministry now says a tax on clergy earnings will start from January 2016. The ruling Sony party had been asking for an even longer delay, reflecting demands made by some protestants and ministers. The ministry said it has decided to delay its plans for 1 more year only out of consideration that some religious groups are willing to voluntarily pay tax.
We want to pay tax as we live a life of honorary poverty and hope. We'll attempt to restore the essence of the clergy members.
The Catholic Church in Korea has already been paying income tax voluntarily since 1994, and Buddhist sectors in the nation are supporting the taxation. However, considering local elections are locked in for 2016 and a presidential election is set for the following year, some are concerned the January 2016 start date could be pushed back. Members of the clergy in Korea have enjoyed tax-exempt status since 1948. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, the presidential office of Cheongwade says it's up to the Justice Ministry to decide whether to release convicted businessmen from prison as part of efforts to revitalize the local economy. The comments came after a finance ministry official said that Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan's views on the need to parole or even pardon top businessmen convicted of various crimes had likely been conveyed to the presidential office in one way or another. The official said that while it's necessary to punish people who have committed a crime, excessively strict punishment actually harms the economy in cases like these. Some say the absence of top businessmen in the nation's top conglomerates has delayed some rather major decision-making processes. Now, on a similar note, the chief of the ruling Saenuri party, Kim Moo-sung, also said that there is a need to parole businessmen due to the ailing economy.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about
Commercial banks in Korea are planning to reduce their number of branches as they are showing weaker performance. The prolonged low interest rate and the widespread use of mobile and online banking services have made the downsizing even more inevitable. Lee Ji-yoon reports.
The recent launch of Daum Kakao's mobile money transfer service has prompted other tech firms to enter the race, and that spells potential trouble for the local banking sector. Prolonged low interest rates have made the situation even worse, with banks turning in some of their lowest performances in the recent years. 10% of branches are experiencing deficits, while banks' overall net profit has shrunk to 1/3 what it was 6 years ago. Around 90% of users who transfer money and check their balances use either mobile and online banking services or go to the automated teller machines rather than visit the bank in person. As this has been the case, banks have been forced to shut down more of their branches. Nonghyup is phasing out 34 branches, Kookmin 18, and Shinhan 6.
The downsizing or merger of branches has become an unavoidable solution. Banks need to strategize their profit system or seek other options like refining their banking services.
With the trend expected to continue for the time being, experts predict a huge wave of restructuring to hit the local banking sector next year. They warn that the closing of bank branches may be just the tip of an iceberg for what's to come. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
Now, despite the government's pledge to recruit employees regardless of their educational background, it seems that it's going to be tougher next year for high school graduates to find jobs at government offices next year. Data released by the Finance Ministry shows the number of jobs that will be offered to high school graduates in 2015 stands at slightly over 17,000, 11% less than last year. And this figure is merely 10% of the total number of recruits by government offices for next year. Experts attribute the decline in the number of jobs available for high school graduates to the Baekhyun administration's focus on increasing part-time positions with flexible working hours.
Now, catching a taxi during the late night hours can be extremely frustrating and challenging here in Seoul, but hopefully things are going to get a bit easier. The Seoul Metropolitan Government rolled out a new website on Friday that provides real-time information on the location of taxis in the capital and whether or not they are empty. The city hopes the information will be used by taxi drivers to spread out and try and cover more of the capital while guiding passengers to areas where cabs are available. Now, in conjunction with the website, Daum Kakao has introduced a smartphone app with this data on it. The information will be available on data.seoul.go.kr. Now to another stunning technological development. Researchers in the United States have developed a set of robotic arms that are controlled by the mind of the amputee patient wearing them. Our Gwon-soa reports.
Robotic arms for amputee patients may sound like something from a science fiction movie, but it is now a reality thanks to a group of U.S. scientists. This is great news for Leslie Baugh, who lost both his arms in a tragic electrical accident 40 years ago. He never thought he'd be moving his own arms again. But that's changed thanks to researchers at the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory and their breakthrough with mind-controlled prosthetic limbs.
Simple things like that that most people never think of. And it's re-available to me.
Researchers say the neurally controlled arms are hooked up to existing nerves and designed to move freely, almost matching the range of movement of a natural limb.
Advanced algorithm that really looks at high-density electrode arrays on the chest muscles, which we've reinnervated, that looks at the almost signature symphony of muscle activity information, and we take that information and translate that to actual movements within a prosthetic.
Scientists believe this is just the beginning for future developments in the field and expect phenomenal advancements over the next 5 to 10 years.
It's not just the accomplishment, but the opening of frontiers and realizing that there's so much more to learn. The research is called Revolutionizing Prosthetics Program and is funded by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Let's now get a check on some of the global headlines we're following this hour. For that, we turn to our Sun Jung-in at the News Center.
Yes, Jung-in, we already celebrated Christmas here in Korea, but it's still Christmas Day in some parts of the world. At the Vatican, Pope Francis delivered a special message where he prayed for peace for those suffering in areas of conflict.
Yes, the pontiff used his traditional Christmas Day speech Thursday to ask people to pray for hope and peace, focusing on refugees, hostages, and others suffering in the Middle East, Africa, and Ukraine. He also emphasized the plight of children in those areas, saying a vast number of young innocents are victims of violence or are forced to become soldiers, and they need to be saved. And through a video message addressed to all Koreans, the 78-year-old pontiff recalled with joy and gratitude his visit to Korea in August and wished all a peaceful and holy Christmas. A pilot from Jordan is being held captive by Islamic State militants after his warplane came down in Syria on Wednesday while on a coalition bombing mission. The family of the pilot, who is identified as Muad al-Qasasbe, appealed for his release, saying that he is just a soldier who was following orders and has no authority. The appeal came after images of the pilot emerged on the internet by the group, showing him being taken from a lake surrounded by militants. This is the first such case of a foreign military member falling into the extremists' hands since a U.S.-led coalition began airstrikes against the group months ago. The group claimed to have shot down the fighter jet with an anti-aircraft missile. However, U.S. defense officials rejected the claim, saying that the cause of the crash was unknown. And over in Russia, President Vladimir Putin has taken a drastic measure to try and boost his country's ailing economy. Speaking in a government meeting on Thursday, Putin said he had decided to scrap New Year's holiday vacation for cabinet ministers. The move comes as the country is being battered by low oil prices and Western sanctions, with the ruble falling sharply over the recent period. Also, in an unprecedented way, Putin admitted that the current economic slowdown was not only caused by external factors, but also by internal problems and mistakes made by the government. Meanwhile, in a bid to stabilize the situation in the domestic grain market, the Russian government said it will impose a 15% duty on wheat exports starting on February 1st next year.
Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. A cold snap swept the country once again this morning, sending the mercury plunging in the upper regions. It's currently -2 degrees here in Seoul, while there are even parts of Gangwon-do province where it's well below -10 degrees. Our daytime highs won't be rising much as well, ranging between 3 to 8 degrees Celsius across the nation. And also there is cold, piercing wind coming in from north, which will make it feel even colder. And the skies will be looking clear all day today due to the influence of high pressure trough. The weekend looks favorable as well, especially on Saturday, when we can finally expect some milder temperatures during the day. But with the rain in the forecast on Wednesday, the temperatures will drop once more into the negatives. Now to our readings for today. So it'll peak to 3 degrees this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will be a bit higher at 6 and 7 degrees. Now moving over to other regions such as Jeju Island will be at 8, Dokdo hits down to 3, while Mankungang is below freezing at -4 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park now. Here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that just about does it for this edition of Newsline at Noon.
Have a great weekend, and we'll be back at noon on Monday.
Until then, goodbye.